I am standing in for the original chair, Steve Van Hagen, who can't make it this morning. Just like to welcome to the dining room, and the theme of these papers today, this morning, is about serious games for education and health. And to start us off, we have Carl von Issika. Is that right? From University of Athens?
No. From Belgian company, we're presenting also on behalf of Finnish Care and University of Athens.
Okay, I'm sure Carl will tell us more about it in just a moment, but the title of this is Gamified Mobile Online Learning for Personal Caregivers with People with Different Disabilities and Older People. Alright? Yeah. Okay, I'll leave you with Carl.
Just going to see this one. Yeah, sure. Okay. Can everyone hear me if I talk like that? Yeah? Fine. If you cannot hear me, just raise your hand or shout and I will speak louder. I was here last year as well. And then I presented the earlier work that we had done on this specific initiative, namely a gamified mobile learning for personal caregivers. Personal caregivers, or personal assistants as they call it in some countries, for people with disabilities, but also for all people. Because also the people in time, they get a number of disabilities where a personal assistant can help. This was a paper prepared by myself, so I'm from Belgium, together with the University of Athens. So the difficult names on are Costa Sotiraco and Stavroula Papafasiliou. I think one of them was here last year as well. Now, to give you some background about the work that we have done, so this is a European funded project that started in 2014. And this project really focuses on understanding and addressing the needs of personal assistants that help people with disabilities and older people. In order to understand that, first of all, we had some knowledge about what personal assistants are doing on a daily basis, what their background is, what they can do, and what they cannot do. So what we know in general is that most personal assistants actually have a very basic education. In fact, they have no specific education how to help people with disabilities. I know this may be different in the UK, but for example in Belgium, zero education required. So actually everyone that has no education at all can become a personal assistant with all the connected problems. Because they lift people wrongly, for example, from the bed, they bed sores, they do not know how to treat it, etc. So we have partners from Turkey, where the situation is also very different. We have partners from Bulgaria, where there's some legislation. Partners from Greece, where there's zero legislation. And partners from Belgium, where, well, we have some indicators what we are allowed to do, but not really well informed or well trained. In the survey that we had, actually we found that more than 50% of the personal assistants, or of the people with disabilities, either had a personal assistant who had zero education, or personal assistant admitted actually that he has no proper education to become a personal assistant. This is worrying, as I mentioned before. So what we also noted is there is basically hardly any online education material available. There are a number of training sessions that exist for personal assistants, but they were funded 10 years ago, and 10 years ago they published on the internet that it was freely usable, and zero trainings took place since 2005. This is one of the disadvantages of these European projects. They are very well running for the 2 years that they are funded, and afterwards it disappears, it's not maintained, it's simply not used anymore. So our idea was the following. We knew that there was a need for training. We knew that we dealt with people with very basic education. It had to be actually, how would I say, they had to be supported, engaged in the training material. And we knew that they would not be interested to read books. I think as majority of us, we are not reading books anymore, or newspapers, we go on the mobile. So the idea was, let us give training through mobile application, and at the same time, let's have them engaged by gamification. So that's what I'm going to present in the next few minutes. I tend to always go over time, so when I have 5 minutes left, just give me a second. So, gamification, I don't think I have to go through all this theory that my colleagues from the University of Athens put there. I think we all know it. It's engaging someone in education material or even in his work by entering or by introducing gaming aspects. And that's what we aim to do also in this application. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. That's all academic stuff. So, what was our aims? Well, the aims, first of all, we wanted them to spend more time on learning things that we wanted them to learn that actually they didn't want to learn. So we had to introduce them to, for example, how do you lift a person properly? How do you move a wheelchair around? But knowing, as I said before, that they were not always interested to sit down and learn it. So we had to think how we're going to present it in a way that is attractive to them. Gamification, as I said, was the way that we thought. Gamification was the way that I thought we could engage them. It also increases actually the satisfaction level. You already see that. So beforehand they got a big syllabus that they had to learn. Now actually they get the mobile application. It's engaging. It is also short in text. We don't want them to read an encyclopedia on their mobile or on their tablet. We want them to read very short to the point instructions, how to deal with certain topics. And in addition, we also kept in mind that in older training sessions that we had organized, and it's also supported by theory and by academic research, there was quite a lot of dropout because people, as I said, they had to learn from syllabus. We have seen, and that's confirmed also by locality, that these dropouts have reduced a lot. So people know that they get some face-to-face training, they also have the mobile application with them, and they can further study at home. So, there are actually 3 aspects that we addressed in this gamification, which we call meaningful gamification. And it is autonomy. They're able to learn actually on their own, because they are engaged, they feel enabled to learn on their own. Competences that are improved, and relatedness. They can link actually also to what we provide to them. So, what did we do? So there are various categories of lessons, I will show that later on, which have a number of awards that they can win per category. That actually introduces also the aspect of, okay, I've got this, let's try if we can go further. Again, I repeat here, we're dealing with people that mostly have a very basic education. No university degrees, often they went to school till 16 and then they stopped, dropouts, as we also call them in Belgium. So we really have to keep them engaged. In addition, we also provide a means to provide constant feedback. They learn something. If they believe this is a good module, they can provide feedback. If they believe it's rubbish, they can also provide that feedback. And believe me, for some of the units you already received feedback that they could be improved, which is obviously the reason why we also piloted in all these countries. So where did we start in order to design this? So I mentioned before there was a survey that we undertook with hundreds of end users on understanding what they wanted to have. We also use the aspect of personas. Personas is a way of presenting a person with specific disabilities, specific needs, not using the real name, but it's actually based on a real person. So we had about 40 of those. I think also Nottingham Trent University uses them for other initiatives. We created a number of scenarios so that the designers were also aware, okay, this is what the user wants to do. We had a number of use cases that were built on that. Then we analyzed the specific tasks that someone had to perform. And then we created a number of mock-ups. So we followed that MDA framework, which is, well, it stands for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. So mechanics describes specific components that we were introducing, especially for the game. The dynamics was just the actual runtime behavior, and then the aesthetics, that's actually more the emotional response that we want to evoke from the player. So if you look at the target user populations, they're quite different, because this is our main group, the low-skilled people, so without any formal education. The current personal assistants and nurses, because there are personal assistants that are already working without an education that want to improve their skills. And then there are nurses that also want to become competent in dealing with disabilities. Because do not forget, more and more people with disabilities also end up in hospitals. And why is that? Also because many people with severe disabilities they live longer and longer. So nurses are also addressing that. Then we have trainers. Trainers from current centers if they provide any training to people with disabilities. So all these three of them we have to keep into account. That's also the reason why, as I will explain later, low-skilled people can easily access all the information, can participate in the gaming, just as the current PCGs. But in addition, the trainers can adjust the training material and can also upload new material. So this is also something novel. The mobile application has content which any person without any practical background in ICT can update through an online application. So, hierarchical task analysis. On the one hand, we had to allow a person to find content on the training to recommend the list that we provide. We had to allow the person to find content through a favorite list, because PCG, it does not mean that he or she has to follow all the lessons. It might be that the PCG says, I'm interested in this and that and that. He or she favorizes it and can come back at any chosen moment. Then it's randomly funded content from all available entries, and then there's comment and discussion that can take place among PCGs. This is the outline. Obviously, we're working here in a European project, so we are forced to bring the language versions together. Once this is finalized, actually, we're going to pull them apart. So there will be an isolated version for the English market, an isolated version for the German market, etc. So once a person has chosen actually the language he goes in, he can actually start interacting with the application. So, as I said before, no, this is something else. In addition to what we do with personal assistance training, we also have a module entered in there to provide some training in assistive technologies. Because if you're a nurse or personal assistant that helps a person that's, for example, using screen readers, or that is using eye gazes, etc., we believe it is needed that he or she understands at least some basics about assistive technology his or her client uses. So we also have embedded in there a support tool for that. So this is what you get. You choose language, then you can select either I want to act as a personal assistant, or I would like to train myself a little bit more in assistive technology information. Which is the outcome, by the way, from another project. So in Belgium, with my company, we try whatever we have learned in the previous project, we integrate it further and further and further. So we learn and we improve. Once we go in the PCG mode, so there's a set of parameters that guide you actually to a wizard. And the idea is that then we can allow a person who cannot easily understand where he or she should look for information, that by asking questions, we can guide them to the correct information. Or you search freely using keywords, or through a list of available courses. I'm going to show them all in a number of screenshots. So once you have selected that you want to get PCG training, there's a wizard available, there's a free search available, you can browse through the courses, there are a number of favorites that you have, there's a login register procedure, and there are the achievements. Achievements which actually the gamification that we have introduced and which I will address later. So wizard, well, at this moment we have a question like, you provide care assistance for what type of person with disability of a normal person. We have piloted this and we're going to kick that out. The reason is very simple, because we cannot really make a lot of difference between personal assistance for an old person or a person with disability. It is very closely related. What type of needs do you need to address? So you get a number of needs that the person needs to address. Which specific task would you need information, and where do you need to provide this kind of assistance? Is this outdoors? Is this indoors? Is this at school, in a public place? This is just part of the questionnaire the wizard someone gets. So For example, what type of needs do you need to address? Is it something to do with disability awareness? So then you get the whole sub-list of disability awareness. So someone also a personal assistant who is, for example, not aware what cerebral palsy is, you can go in there and check, I want to know about this specific disability, and you get specific information about this type of disability. Here, this is a free search. It's very simple. You look for a specific term, and it will render all the articles where that term is found in the training content. Here, for example, is the interaction taking place in Greek. So this is also one of the challenges apparently that the university had, because we're working with Cyrillic, we're working with Greek, and then we work with Roman characters as well. But it's all supported for the time being. Here is an example where all the modules are shown. I apologize that they are small, but when I do it on my tab, these balls are much bigger. So we use a visual approach, and we also use a textual approach. So just for those that are interested, we have a module on disability awareness, social inclusion, hygiene, environment, communication skills, psychological empowerment, daily care at home, mobility, policy, physiological needs, first aid and risk, leisure and daily activities. Also the burnout of the PCG, because this is a main issue nowadays also in Belgium, and didactical support. Here is an example whereby after you, for example, go to visit, you get two specific sections which are relevant to you. And this is just an example entry that we have here. This is a login procedure, I'm not going to spend time on that. This in general, so we are enabled actually in the mobile application to enter any kind of media that we want, whether it's textual, whether it's audio, whether it's video or whatsoever. I think this is this is another example here. So we can support with pictures, and I insist here again, whoever decides to put extra information, it goes in the backend. It's actually WordPress that we use for that. You go into WordPress, you enter a new article, put it in the correct category, it pops up in the online application. So this is, for example, the video integration. Now, the next point, the next element that we did was the gaming. And the gaming here, on the one hand, we have the low-skilled persons that use it, and they actually, they don't really want to see it as a motivator that I'm going to improve my job. Because these low-skilled people, when I talk about low-skilled people, I'm talking about people that do not behave as a person, for example, family members. They, for example, we have to motivate them in a way that they believe, okay, it makes me a better person because I can help actually family members. On the other hand, when we talk about PCG, the personal caregiver, this is a person that has as a profession to be a personal assistant. Obviously there, making him feeling a sense that he's better in his job, that's an intrinsic motivator that we have to address. So, we have an awarding system embedded in there that supports gamification, whereby there are a number of point values that we associate to a number of activities. So first of all, you create an account, already you get a number of points awarded. That's like an early welcome bonus. Still, for example, when you provide comments, when you favorite module, or when you start in the top. So all these points together with questions that we ask, let's call it test, actually award the person to further study his or her content. This is just an example. So per module that we have a number of questions that we ask from the person. Based on those questions, the person gets awarded points, etc. There's a whole awarding interaction in there. So also we indicate, for example, who are the best users from all those that are participating, and you get a kind of ranking. Now, I also would like to address this. So on the one hand, we do lots of training for people with disabilities, but we also address a number of other issues that all are connected inclusion and education. And in some of them, we also introduce games. I just want to highlight those to you. So, just for those that are interested, this is about social competences and inclusion. This is being demonstrated by the people of NTU in the other hall. That's a project that addresses actually increasing social competence of people with disabilities. So they have the whole range of training material available in the other room. We also work in the area of employment, ITAG competences, and actually those two aspects we also brought together in the Educare project that I was presenting to you. I have a small stand on the social media. If you would be interested for further information about the project and the other work that we do, please do not hesitate to come. I have leaflets available and I can provide you whatever information is there. I think I'm at the end of my time. I just want, yeah, okay. One element that we also always address in any project that we do that addresses inclusion and education, we always try to have at the centerpiece courses, but they are always supported by a number of, let's call it, satellite activities. One of those satellite activities is always games. So in all the projects that we have been presented, I think in all the ITAGs, we always have training components, always supported with games. Sometimes they are separate games that we present, sometimes they are games that are embedded within the training material, depending on the target group. Nextly, I will skip this. That's at the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask me, and otherwise, I'll go to the next one.
Okay, thank you. Very much, Carl. Can I invite any questions for Carl, please?
I just wonder, I saw a list of disability, but nothing like mental health.
I just saw a small one. There's a whole list of mental health under there. Learning disabilities, everything.
Any more? Thank you.
Yeah. From the user's point of view, you mentioned the use of leaderboards. You mentioned the use of leaderboards.
Yeah.
Obviously there's an element of competition there. I just wondered if you had you sort of explored the opinions, the possible fears, I suppose, of people who might feel like they're being judged if they're lower down the leaderboard.
Yeah, this is now, at this moment we are piloting this, and this is one of the comments that we have received back, why some of them do not want to be judged like that. So whether the leaderboard will stay in there or not is debatable at the moment. We have that raised as an issue. It's also, the other issue that was raised was privacy issues.
Right.
So we are in fact, in some cases, we're not allowed to share such user information with others. While if at the moment that you rank, someone actually provide already some information. So this is at the moment being discussed whether we're going to keep it in or keep it the option.
Thank you. And one at the back there, please.
Just a couple of questions. One, on the sort of moving and handling there, there's obviously quite a lot of, there's one category on moving and handling, and I just wondered how much. It's a very difficult area because it's to do with
We go very deep.
interpersonal skills. I'm interested in how
We go very deep.
Yeah.
First of all, we have organized the training material in slides format, the original training material. Then we transfer that to mobile applications. The original training slides are something like 200 slides, and they go from very far. They go from, for example, someone who's in a wheelchair and wants to move to the bed. Someone, for example, who is on the ground wants to move into a wheelchair. Someone who is in the bed and has to be put straight forward. We also, for example, handle how do you take care of someone in a wheelchair? Because people just think you just push it and that's it. It's a very specific way, for example, how you deal with curbs, how you deal with elevators, etc. So it goes very deep in detail. And for that we have on board a number of experts from Turkey whose daily job it is actually providing such kind of training.
Second question I like about is that I work a lot in the disability arts movement, and we talk about disabled people, not people with disabilities, because people with disabilities implies really better than life with disability. And I'm just interested in how the idea of social model comes through with your app.
Well, that's funny that you mention it, because if you contact academics, one will, academics and people from the end user grouping, one will say, oh, use people with disabilities, the other one will say, use disabled people, the other one will say, people with special needs, etc. So we took as an average, we're going to take people with disabilities. Do not forget also, this has to be provided in all languages. We had your debate going on in England and the States. Remember that the term retarded is used in America in many cases. So you have your own little battle here to still find out what is correct. We follow mix. We follow mix.
How do you describe how does that come through?
So we have a specific section in the disability ones where we explain the social and medical model. The point is that in reality, when we talk with end users, they prefer to use a medical model as description, not social. So again, I refer here for the English version. It's a battle and we cannot decide on that. We just have involved also an expert here from England to address the English text, and they agreed it should be people with disabilities. In Dutch, however, we have to translate it totally different because there we have the same discussion on, yes, but if you use that kind of terminology, it's a social model, if you use that kind of terminology, it's medical model. There's no agreement. In Bulgaria, it's very straightforward, and they don't have any discussion. And in Turkey, they don't have any discussion. So,
in other projects which don't file, we describe users' capabilities as well as their limitations, which helps by an ontology to link to possible interventions you can use. So actually, we are very pro using social model with disability. Absolutely. Linking to technology using kind of computing approaches which can link a variety of interventions, realizing it's a very heterogeneous population. Is there a microphone at the front in this room? Is there a roving microphone? Okay, because I might be asking questions and make sure.
anyone else?
Okay, there's 2 minutes or so if there's any more questions. I think that might do us then. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Carl. We're at 5 minutes or so until the next discussion. So time to change room if necessary.
Oh, no, don't worry about
Just
it. It's fine.
I want my glasses on or not to look at that little screen bar. Probably find something in the back one. It's quite great. Start off standing there at least. The doctor, not Mister, that's for sure. Well, last year as well. I told him last year. Nick's still doing his PhD. He's been doing it for the last. Is there any warrant?
It's like
more people than seats this year.
Okay, I think we'll get started again. Just carrying on with the theme of serious games for education and health. The next presentation is from Andy Burton. And I think it's just you, Andy, presenting, is it?
Presenting it.
But working with David Brown, Stephen Battersby, just checking, Steve, and Nick Shopland, who are around and about. I'm sure you can talk to them later. But Andy's going to talk about the serious games to improve social competencies and creativity in students at risk of social exclusion. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so today I'm speaking on behalf of actually quite a large consortium. I'll be speaking about this project. Put the banner on the right hand side here, SGSCC, which stands for Serious Games for Social Competencies and Creativity. So just to say a little bit about the project, it's a lifelong learning programme, KA3 project, which is for the promotion of ICT for learning. It's one of the 4 key activities in the lifelong learning programme's transversal programme. It's a 30-month project and it actually finished back in July. So we're at a stage now where we have all of the deliverables that we've created. I'm going to talk to you today really about what we've created and also the piloting that happened and the outcomes from that piloting. Okay, so the project really is dedicated to conceptualisation and development of social competence in both adult education, school education and also in professional development. The targets for the project were people with learning disabilities and disadvantaged groups, and the expected impact would be increased employability and better social integration of the beneficiaries of the project. So, during the 2.5 years of the project, we created a significant amount of materials. We created a training curriculum, and the main themes of that curriculum are communication, self-esteem, self-control, cooperation, conflict resolution, assertiveness, and creativity. We also created a set of supporting materials and exercises for trainers, and this document is some 250 pages long, so it's a significant amount of work there, and there's a lot of useful materials if you're actually involved in this kind of training. I do urge you to take a look. You may find something very useful in there. We've also developed, over the course of the project, some games. As you can see from the title of the project, it's Serious Games. So what we've developed are a mobile game and a desktop game. I'm going to say a little bit about those in a couple of slides. I've got some video captures of the games in action to show you in a moment. And we've also developed a handbook which should teach trainers how to use all the materials together, so to use the curriculum, the supporting materials with the games to formulate a training session or training programme to deliver the training material. Okay, so I just want to describe briefly the games that we developed. This one was developed mainly by our partners ITAG in Lithuania. And this is a mobile game. As you can see, it's available in all the project languages. And essentially there are 3 different games within this mobile application. The first one is matching pairs of facial expressions, and it's all about recognising emotions. The second one, spot positive statements, which is about self-esteem. So it'll present you with a statement, for example, this one, I am valuable, and you have to say whether you think it's positive or negative. And the final game is about seeing other people's points of view and recognising that other people may have a different point of view to yourself. So this is carried out in this way. You're presented with some shapes and you're expected to be able to see how the king, who's sat the other side of the shapes, sees these shapes in the game. and it asks you, what do you see? You see the blue and the left to the right, and the king sees the opposite. So if we could just play that first video now. So this is just to give you a feel of the Inca's Quest game. Okay, so that's the mobile game. Moving on. At Nottingham Trent, where I'm actually a research fellow in the Interactive Systems Research Group there. The other authors listed on this presentation are also part of the Interactive Systems Research Group. This was our major work within the project, was to develop the desktop game. And what we've developed is a first-person game where you actually work with another player who is actually someone you can control. You can get them to do different things for you to help you out. And basically, it's like it's called Inca Island, and it's set on an island, and you have to go around the island and actually solve tasks and progress through the game, working with your partner to solve tasks that address these particular topics: communication, self-esteem, self-control, cooperation, conflict resolution, and assertiveness. So there are 6 different paths to this game, and each one has 3 different rooms where you have to solve different tasks. So it's a very significant piece of work, and it's very useful in you can step through one of the particular paths when you've been covering a particular topic from the materials. So I've got a quick video of part of this game as well, which I'd like to show now. This looks slightly jerky because I've been capturing whilst playing at the same time, so it's putting a little bit too much stress on the process. So this is your character. As you can see, he walked up to here, he realises he needs to get across this bridge, but he needs to find out how he can do that. So have a little look around. Discover that he stands on this thing on the floor, the bridge comes down. This is a cooperation task. And he's now using the controls to send this companion character to stand on the button while he crosses the bridge. commands his companions to follow. He's standing on the butt to the bridge down, and that's completed that task. So that gives you a kind of an idea, a feel for what the games are like.
That wasn't too bad. Let's continue along the beach. There looks like there is a structure down there on the other side of the water. Hopefully we will be able to find a way to get across as we get closer.
Okay, so the materials and the games have been piloted in 7 different countries. That's Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Serbia, Turkey and the UK. And the target groups were mild, moderate and severe learning disabilities and excluded groups. I'm not tall enough for you, sorry. You should warm out the shoes. So the piloting was carried out by the project partners who are listed here. They're also listed on this banner if you want to see who was involved in the project. So, as you can see, with 7 different countries, it's quite a large-scale pilot. We had 304 trainees, and they came from different institutes, special education schools, end-user organisations, secondary schools, sheltered homes, vet schools. 70% of the trainees had disabilities, 30% of the trainees were from disadvantaged groups. So essentially what you've got there is an extremely diverse set of pilots. So we have one standardised methodology that we're trying to run through, but we had to adapt this in the different countries and in the different situations to fit the needs of the participants. So the variations were in the numbers of students involved, the trainer to student ratios, the levels and types of disability, the training sessions, the session length, sorry, the numbers of sessions and the languages. So there's a whole set of different variables, and we had 67 trainers involved as well in these pilots. So the pilot approach that we were attempting to use from the beginning, we have a set of questionnaires to ask the trainees and the trainers about the baseline social competencies of the participants, which we took before they started any of the training. The participants then attended a series of sessions where they would use the training materials, work through a particular topic perhaps, play the game about that particular topic, and they would be observed in those sessions by members of the team, and they would be observing to try and see what was going right, what was going wrong, which things were working, which things weren't working. There were also questionnaires following the sessions on the usability and on the workshop exercises that have been undertaken during those sessions. So after each session they would say what they thought of the materials, and that was fed back to the team so the team could iteratively improve the materials and improve the games to make them work better for the participants. And at the end of the full training workshop, there was also further questionnaires about the social competencies of the participants to see whether there were any observable changes. And we also observed a number of case studies which we've put together in the piloting report document as well. So in the descriptions of training in different countries, most had weekly or 2 weekly sessions. In Lithuania they had monthly sessions, and Turkey they had weekly sessions. But the majority are varying in terms of the number of sessions or the spacing of the sessions. So it becomes difficult then to compare the results across the sites. So what I've done, I've broken down where we've got some of the more useful results. I've broken them down into the partner countries here. And you can see that the Lithuanian one, there's not actually much deviation between social competencies observed before and after the workshops. Their workshops were spaced monthly, so perhaps that's something to do with the time difference between each session. The others were more regular workshops, and I think we can see from those that the red line, which is the social competence observed after the training, is outside, in most cases, the social competence observed before. So that's the higher rating is outside, 5 and it's 0 in the middle. So people were observing an improvement in their social competencies following the sessions in general. Some observations that were made: participants observed a change after the training. 62% feel more able to initiate conversation. 53% more able to calm down when they're angry. And 71% more able to express feelings when they're wronged. Okay, so in terms of evaluating the learning materials themselves, the learning materials have proved to be useful for the target group, as evident by the high average mark. It received 4.35 out of 5 on average, and highly positive feedback given during the sessions in which the handbook was used. They were assessed as clear and comprehensible. They're engaging for the user group, and the trainers state that a more varied set of difficulty levels would have been useful. There were 3 levels provided. Further feedback from the workshops: the trainers reported that the participants had been immensely interested through the workshops. The exercises were generally assessed as useful and moderately hard. The high engagement was reported throughout the pilots, as well as good retention of the materials. And the majority of the participants liked the exercises and reported that they'd learned something useful. So in terms of desktop games, there was high engagement achieved. The games were engaging and immersive. There was a considerable liking of the realistic situations, the first person and the environment. And there were a lot of comments like, "I'm really playing a real computer game." People were surprised to see it looking like a game that they played on their computer outside of education. Some of the negatives: some of the aspects require considerable ICT and cognitive skills. This is more about the control of the game, being able to use the user interaction methods, so being able to steer with the keyboard, etc., control the partner character. Some participants found the game hard to play and tiring, potentially because it's quite a long game in terms of the amount of content in there. And it was mainly of interest to trainees with mild learning difficulties and on the autistic spectrum. It was highly liked when we took it in the UK to an autistic school in Nottingham. They were very engaged by it. The mobile game, again, highly engaged. The 3 games were liked, and they had very close linkage with the training exercises, and they were nice and brief. So even trainees with quite severe learning difficulties were able to complete some of the levels. The game allows me to correct my mistakes, was one observation. So if you get it wrong, you get to try again. The negatives: it requires a smartphone and tablet, which perhaps some of the user group don't have access to. The point of view game is for some trainees too abstract to grasp. So finally, lessons learned. The trainer attitude and preparation is a very important aspect in the delivery. So it's all about designing your session, using the materials we provided, and working with the games in the right sort of ratios to achieve the engagement that we want to achieve. The individual user's needs really do need to be taken into account when planning those lessons. But it was very clearly observed that the synergies created between the different aspects of the materials that we produce, the games, the curriculum, and linking those up with perhaps other materials that you would otherwise use, videos, cartoon stories, or your own prepared materials, can create a really powerful, engaging training material. It's about time, Jamie.
That's it. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Andy. So, as before, we've got about 5 minutes for questions. Please, anything to be asked? Just in the middle there, please. Thank you.
All the deliverables, you on the website?
Sorry, just in the middle there first. If you don't mind.
That's great. Thank you for this really interesting presentation. I'm coming at this from the perspective of a neuroscientist and psychologist who works on autism spectrum.
Yep.
Number one, in the example clip that you showed, the player was using a physical sort of spatial manipulation as a sort of proxy for social interaction. You're replacing the partner in the place where you want them to stand.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how typical that is of the game. I mean, I think of people with autism, picking up my hand and moving it as a tool to what they want. I'm wondering how can that be treated as a positive aspect of the game, or perhaps a negative to some players?
I guess it could be construed as both, depending on the individual you're working with. The way we developed it in that way, because there was quite a lot of discussion at the start of the project whether we would actually link it up, network it, and actually have people working together. It came down because of the immense amount of development we actually did on the game to create all the different levels that were required by the consortium. That aspect had to actually be removed from the game, but it was something that was certainly considered at the development phase.
Okay. And a second part, if I may, outcome measures. You mentioned self-assessment measures, perhaps from different countries, which actually would be interesting cross-cultural studies.
Yeah.
But were there any objective outcome measures for social function other than self-assessment?
It was done by not only self-assessment, it was also done by an assessment using the trainers, because in some instances, some of the students had disabilities to the level that they couldn't really meaningfully self-assess their own social competencies. So
standard instruments, scales.
The instruments I don't know if there's a few other people in the room who are involved in this project. I'm not sure exactly which measures were used.
Were there standard scale instruments used as objective outcome measures of social function?
There were a number of different tools used. I'm not sure exactly which tools were used. We did. I wasn't actually involved personally in piloting an outside. A lot of involvement in.
To measure social competence.
Sorry, David?
Are you talking about tools to measure social competence? It was a STAR tool, so it was ratings of confidence, self-esteem, managing aggression, which was set by the teacher or trainer, and through observation looked at the journey that person had made over repeated sessions of using the game.
Okay.
And that combined also with the observational the observation notes taken during the sessions, and also we did create at the end a quite comprehensive set of case studies based on people with different abilities. So it may be worth you having a look at case studies as well.
Yeah, I think there might be some element of subjectivity about applying that particular measure, and there might be more appropriate measures that we could take which were open to subjectivity.
Okay. probably get another couple of questions, and there's one at the back and there's one at the front, so should we go for yours first?
It's a very quick one, really. We're in the process of developing a similar game, if you like, cross-channel within Interreg project. So rather than reinvent the wheel, we might like to adapt some of the material. Are there any intellectual property rights attached to the KA3?
There is an IPR agreement on the contract, but all the materials are actually freely available. And I think if you wanted to adapt them, I think they could be adapted by yourselves as long as credit is given to the original developers.
Okay, thank you. And yes, at the back, thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Congratulations on the quality of the project outcomes. I and hopefully delegates in the room are interested in the technologies which are powering these applications that we see out scheme. May you provide an insight into the tools or software development environments you use, the complexity of the development process, and also the duration taken to create assets of this quality?
The game was developed over a period of around about a year. I'm talking about a desktop game. Our involvement was the development of that. We used Unity 3D as our development environment. And we've been using Unity across a number of projects for a few years now. So we have a few resources that we can use and pull together to create these environments. But there was an awful lot of work. The initial work was actually done on this project, so we've now got a set of tools that we hopefully transfer into other projects as well, utilising Unity. The mobile game was developed it uses Air, so I think it's a Flash system, but we would be pushing out more towards using Unity for that as well, because it allows us to go cross-platform basically. Anything we develop in Unity, we can then port to not only Windows but also to iPhone, to Android, etc., to make it more widely usable.
Thank you, Andy. I think that's, if there's any more questions, I'm sure you can catch up with Andy later. But we'll probably have to be quite quick to move on to the next session in about 2 or 3 minutes, if you don't mind. But thank you, Andy. This is what we're doing when Helen's not for anything.
You also?
Helen was supposed to be.
I think she said she would turn out late. Might be the other way.
Okay, the last session, the last presentation for the morning session, still in the theme of serious games for education and health, is Bill Byron from ITAG.
Yes.
Okay, who will talk to us about clinical trials, respec, the role of games and game concepts in the future of clinical trials. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks very much, and thanks for hanging in just before lunch. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've lived in Nottingham for 25 years, and it's particularly a pleasure to be in the council house, because that's the first time I've managed to get in here legally. Yeah, really nice to be in here. I've always wondered what it was like inside. Okay. Can you advance it? Oh, thank you. Oh, great. So I just want to take you through, I work in the pharmaceutical industry, and my interest is in how we use games and gamification in clinical trials. So I'm going to cover 4 areas and just briefly tell you a little bit about clinical trials, because some of you might not be aware of the process of clinical drug development. And then talk a little bit about some of the challenges in today's clinical trials that we face, and that'll link quite nicely, I think, into the use of games and gamification. I've got a few examples that they're not games that we've produced at ICON, but they're games that we're aware of that pharma companies are using in clinical trials. And just a few comments about future direction. So first of all, just a quick overview. So just a couple of minutes on clinical trials, clinical drug development. I'm going to wander around a little bit. Just tell me if you can't hear me. But it takes thousands of molecules to be discovered to actually produce just a handful that would actually go into clinical trials and into clinical drug development. And in clinical trials, this period here, we've got 3 phases of drug development. Phase 1 is studies in healthy volunteers, so not in patients. And these are typically pretty small studies. You do a lot of blood sampling to sample for the drug concentration in the body. And you're really looking to understand how the drug's absorbed, how quickly it's absorbed, and how quickly it's eliminated. And that information helps you to decide what type of doses, what dose range and what regimens to take forward into phase 2, which is patients. And the first part, this phase 2 part in patients, is really trying to figure out the best dose range for your compound. So, which dose range is the most effective and the safest, i.e. has the best safety profile. Once you figure that out, you go into phase 3, and these are very large studies, typically a number of hundreds of patients in each trial. And these are confirmatory trials, so designed to test against a placebo or against an active comparator and to show the effects of your drug. For every 5 compounds that start off in phase 1, only about 1 gets to the end of phase 3 and gets to be submitted to a regulatory authority for a license approval. And on average, it costs over $1 billion to produce a drug. And it takes, from discovery, it takes 10 to 15 years to get it to the point of approval. And when you think that a pharmaceutical company probably has a 20-year patent, it only gives them a little bit of time actually to get their money back on the market. And a typical clinical trial itself goes through a number of different stages. We have patients coming in for a screening. This is really just to figure out if they qualify for the study, so if they have the right condition and the right demographics and that sort of thing. They're then assigned to a treatment group, so a randomization process. At this point, they'll start taking the active treatment, and they'll follow that through a number of different clinic assessments until the study, the last visit. And at these assessments, they'll be measuring things to do with the effects of the drug, looking at safety of the patient, such as measuring their vital signs, their pulse rate, their heart rate, their ECGs, etc., as they're going through the study. Once they've finished treatment, there'll be a follow-up assessment sometime later as well. So at ICON are a company that I work for, a clinical research organisation, so we perform all aspects of clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies. And in particular, we will design studies, write study protocols, we'll recruit doctors and patients, we will monitor the studies whilst they're running, we'll collect the data, clean the data, analyse the data, write the reports. So everything you can imagine to do with a clinical trial is what we do. And I work in the technology area, in the innovation team. We're looking at how new technologies can apply to clinical trials and help us to conduct trials better, but also collect more efficient data. So that's my interest really in games and gamification. So just a couple of challenges to do with today's trials, and I think this will help to position some of the areas that we look at in a minute when we look at some of the games and the gaming approaches. So the first is patient recruitment is a real problem. So getting patients who are willing to participate in a clinical trial can be a problem. We heard in the keynote all the Daily Mail articles about various aspects of computer gaming. Well, the Daily Mail love to publish things about clinical trials as well with a similar slant. So it is difficult. 80% of studies fail to meet their target recruitment timelines. 30% of clinical sites, so a doctor's surgery, will fail to recruit even one subject. And in a big phase 3 study, it can cost nearly $40,000 a day just to operate a trial. So those delays are hugely expensive. What's interesting though is that actually many patients don't know that there is an opportunity to participate in a clinical study. And of those that do, actually many would be willing to consider it. So some good information here from the National Institutes of Health in the States. 3% of cancer patients actually participate in clinical trials, but 85% of them weren't even aware that there was an opportunity. Another challenge is once we've got patients in the trial is actually having them stay in the trial. And obviously there are reasons why patients withdraw from clinical trials due to not getting on with the drug, for example. But sometimes they just lose interest in the study. The average dropout rate in clinical trials is 15 to 40%. And dropouts can undermine the results of the study. So an example here is that the FDA declined to give an approval for a particular drug because there was too much missing data, too many withdrawals. And they felt that the robustness of the results just couldn't be proven because there was so much missing information. And then finally, and I think something we started to touch on in the last talk, objective endpoints. So in many clinical trials, you can actually physically measure things that are important. So blood pressure, or in a diabetes study, you might take blood glucose measurements, for example. And that shows you how your drug is working. But in other therapy areas, you're relying on subjective assessments, either from the patient or from the clinician. So an example here, this is the Fugl-Meyer assessment. It's a standard instrument that's used in stroke recovery patients to measure upper extremity movements, so their ability to move left and right arm function. And as you can see, the investigator goes through a number of different aspects of movement and rates them on a 0, 1 or 2 scale. So the ability for a scale like that, which is quite crude and also subjective, to detect small changes and early changes is actually quite difficult. So an objective measurement, a physical measurement that you could measure through doing an exercise would actually be potentially a more attractive approach. So let's go and look at a few examples of the use of games and gamification, and it will address those 3 areas that we've looked at. So the first is learning about clinical research. So going back to the cancer example, 85% of patients don't actually know that there's an opportunity to participate in a clinical trial. Some companies have produced games to try and help educate patients about clinical studies. So one example here is a clinical trial simulator. It was produced by the National Health Service, the National Institute for Health Research. This is clearly a sort of low resolution, sort of retro looking game. It looks a little bit like the sort of Super Mario Brothers games, if you played those back in the 80s. Some of you may have done, not all I can see. So yeah, for people of perhaps my age, this might be quite an attractive thing because it's a little bit like going back to your youth. And in this particular example, you were testing, you're going through a clinical trial to test a medicine that can make you fly. So I think this was, well, it was developed at the time of Red Bull, but I don't think they had any litigation issues there. But so you go through all the stages of a clinical trial, from going to the doctor's office, learning about the study, having some assessments done, taking some medication, practicing flying and measuring how well you can fly, and all those sorts of things. Exactly the kind of processes you would go through in a clinical trial. As you go along, they also explain certain terms. So, for example, here they're explaining what a patient information sheet is. As part of the consenting process, you give permission to participate in a study. And at the end, they show, they tell you what happens to your data and what they're going to do with everybody's data at the end of the study and how it's going to teach them about their particular drug. When this was launched in 2013, the first few hundred people that use this game were asked an additional question. Now you've done this, would you be interested in participating in a clinical trial if the opportunity came up? And 90% said that they'd consider it. There's another example. This was produced by the New England Research Institutes in the USA, and it's a fantasy game aimed at children aged 8 to 14, and really aimed to help children to understand what it would be like and perhaps alleviate any fears they might have about being in a clinical research study, and also for their parents, of course, to do the same. In this game, it's a fantasy game. The brother of the user, of the player, has been trapped inside a book, and it's an adventure book, and with a number of other characters, the player has to go in and rescue the brother and rescue these other characters by playing a number of different quests. And during these quests, they can slay dragons, and each of the dragons represents a fear or an uncertainty about clinical trial. And as they slay the dragons, they get information to alleviate or give a different perspective on that fear. The researchers who developed this did a research on the effectiveness of this way of learning. They did a study in 250 children. They found that after using the video game, children had increased their knowledge about clinical research when they were tested, but the control group, which actually were people who were just given a paper information sheet, actually had more knowledge. Right? So it wasn't desperately effective, this approach. But here's some examples. So this is one of the people that needs to be rescued, and she's afraid that entering a clinical trial, that the doctors may find something else that's wrong with her, and she's afraid of that. And here's, I think I slayed a particular dragon. You don't see that, there's a puff of smoke there. And I've now revealed the truth about needles, and that not all trials involve injections and needles, for example. So just some considerations as I thought about this. There's some good research by Van Eck. I don't know if you're familiar with this researcher, somebody that I came across as I was looking through this area. He says that interactive game-based learning could be a particularly effective approach for millennials and Generation Z, so that's people in their 20s and 30s now. And they like this sort of way of learning with multiple streams of information and very interactive approaches. So a gaming environment, perhaps for this demographic, might be a good way of conveying information about a clinical trial, for example. But he also says that learning occurs in meaningful and relevant context. The best learning occurs in meaningful and relevant context. So, and I think as I go back to those two examples, the first one, the simulator, you're actually learning and you're playing a game which is about the same context. It's about being in a clinical trial. In the second example, the fantasy is somewhat disconnected from the actual learning objective. And it seems to me that you could play the game and not actually connect really with the learning objectives. And I think perhaps that was one of the reasons why that particular approach wasn't quite as effective. So let's go on to the next area, which is gamification. Yeah. And we heard earlier in the first talk in this session, gamification is the use of video game elements to improve user experience and engagement in non-game services and applications. And Hermione and colleagues put a conceptual model together which looks a bit like this. They talk about motivational affordances, so this is like things like getting points in a gamification environment, which creates psychological outcomes. That could be satisfaction, and these lead to behavioural outcomes, and these are the things that you're trying to motivate and change. So in a clinical trial context, the type of behaviours you're looking for are they completing their symptom diary regularly every day as requested? Are they attending clinic visits? Are they taking their medication, reading information that you send them, etc.? So a really nice example is Trials Connect. They produced a gamified app which basically enables people to accumulate points and rewards based on their behaviour throughout a clinical trial. And they visualise this by you growing a flower. You start off with a sleeping seed and you move through to a fully blooming flower at the end as you go through different stages of the study and collect different points for your behaviour. So just one consideration really about this is the ethical side of things. So whilst it's good to encourage and motivate patients in a clinical trial, what you can't do is turn those virtual rewards into physical rewards. You're not able to give that sort of encouragement to stay in a trial for ethical reasons. But 80% of patients enter a trial because they want to help others with the same condition. And so what we've found is that actually linking rewards, virtual rewards, to a charity donation or a charity connected to the disease that's being studied is actually a very motivational way of doing this in an ethical way. So just the final section, just a couple of examples here. This is measuring outcomes assessments from gameplay, and this is the bit I'm particularly interested in, and I think there's some good parallels with some of the rehabilitation work that we'll hear about later today as well. So one example is cognitive function testing. This is a typical computer-based system that we would use in the laboratory to test cognitive function in patients. It has 2 buttons to press and a mouse to click for different tests, and it can measure various things like reaction times and aspects of memory, etc. It's not desperately engaging, as you can see. Another approach is to use computer games, and Achille Laboratories have developed a game called Project Evo. It's a game in which you have to balance on a platform and steer it through a course at increasing speed. And you have to also deal with distractions, so certain distractions you have to tap, others you have to ignore. And it's aimed at measuring interference processing, or the ability for people to multitask in the presence of distractions. So I think as we heard in the keynote, that's got application in ADHD, and we're seeing one pharmaceutical company using this game now in clinical trials to measure interference processing, but also in Alzheimer's, and Pfizer are using it now in Alzheimer's for a similar purpose. The second example, and I think one which has got real merit as we think about rehabilitation as well, is using the Microsoft Kinect platform in muscular dystrophy patients. This is a particular application called Active Seated. It was created by the Nationwide Children's Hospital in the States. And it basically looks at functional reaching volume in 6 different regions. It looks at overhead, side to side, and forwards. And instead of using an investigator rating scale, so getting an investigator to rate someone on a scale of 1, 2, 3, you're actually able to make objective and continuous measurements of a player's reaching ability. And in muscular dystrophy, if you're not aware, over the course of the disease, patients get increasing muscular weakness and functioning. So this is quite an important outcome measure. So the game looks like this. The arms control paddles. the player goes through a cave, and they use their arm movement to remove gems and to squish spiders that are on the walls of the cave. They found in their research that actually this is a measurement that provides really quite good, robust and reliable measures of extremity movements in these patients. So just some considerations on this. I've just got one more minute. I think those two examples show that actually gaming environments have huge potential to measure things that actually perhaps we had difficulties measuring before in the way that patients react and operate. So particularly in terms of cognitive function and in movements as well. As well as that, they're fun, right? So I think, you know, if we're thinking about trying to make more engaging clinical trials and trials that people want to participate in, actually having this sort of assessment is probably more fun and engaging. However, we've got to remember clinical trials are conducted across multiple countries, lots of different cultures, lots of different demographics in terms of age ranges of patients. And whatever instruments we use to collect health outcomes, they've got to be applicable to all of that group of subjects. So when we think about computer games, there's conflicting research that would tell you about the applicability of games to different groups of patients and different age groups and different cultures, etc. So we've just got to be mindful of that in whatever we create. I think it's got great parallels to rehabilitation solutions. And it'd be interesting to know what kind of objective measures are measured within, so for example, stroke rehab exercises delivered on a motion-based platform to figure out exactly how a patient is improving and quantify that. But in all cases, those measures that we create, we have to demonstrate that they're clinically relevant if we're going to use them in a drug trial. So just finally, I think in the pharmaceutical industry, there really is a growth of the use of interactive learning approaches for patient education. So not just games, but also just online learning and those kinds of things. There's a huge drive to make trials more patient-centered, and this can be around gamified retention approaches like the one we saw, making more engaging assessments, so using games instead of more clinical measures, and the greater ability to conduct assessments at home. So not inconveniencing patients who are perhaps working with having to go to clinic every week to have assessments made. Perhaps some of these game-based measures can be things they can actually do at home. We can collect the data from that. And finally, yeah, I think there is a lot of interest we've seen with Pfizer and Shire and other pharmaceutical companies looking at serious games and how we can use those to measure treatment-related effects. So I think you have huge potential in this area, and for me, certainly one to watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, can I invite any questions? Thank you.
So compared to like standard development of the drug, how much quicker, is it quicker and cheaper doing this, like to develop a game? Is that on the same time scale as developing, you're saying like thousands and thousands of molecules and then get them done?
So you're referring about creating a game to actually treat rather than to measure. So I don't know actually. I mean, it will be quicker because there's less, there's less concern over safety and side effects and that sort of stuff. But so there's probably less things to look at. I think you still would need to do some clinical trials to measure the effect and the of the drug, because if a health insurer or a health provider is going to use the game, they want to get value for money, return on investment. So they're going to want to know what does it cost and what's the effect, and then they can weigh that up against other treatments.
Okay. Yes.
I thought that was really interesting, so thank you. I just wondered whether you see, obviously your organisation's very willing to embrace gaming, but is there a perception amongst the wider medical and pharmacological community that gaming maybe doesn't have the credibility? I know in my institution we've spoken to surgeons, for example, and they seem to think it suffers from a branding issue, and as gaming, it's not a game, it's people's lives, and that's the response we get. And do you see that being an issue and being overcome anytime soon?
Yeah, it's a very conservative issue, industry. So, anything new, particularly things like this, are going to be treated with a bit of suspicion. But what's really positive is seeing companies like Pfizer and Shire adopting these approaches and taking it forward. So, I think there is a place, but I think again, we are very conservative. So it takes a bit of time to get these things.
You don't see it becoming mainstream anytime in the future. That's a much longer view.
I think a lot of companies are watching to see what happens with these pilots that Shire and Pfizer are doing, and on the back of that, there may be a lot more interest. But most companies seem to just watch, and there's a few pioneering companies who will try new things, and some of those will die away, and some of them will move forward, and I think it's one to watch.
Thank you. Stevie, I think you're...
Hi, thank you, Bill, for a very interesting talk. Excuse me. You talked about the trial becoming more patient-centric, but I was wondering how much you involve public and patients in the design of the games themselves.
Yeah, so I can't necessarily answer that because I'm involved in the design of things. But I know for sure that's becoming more and more important, even in the design of clinical trials, of involving patient groups early on in the design to understand, what would be possible for them, what would be difficult, what would be impossible. And I think as you design games, you have to include patients in that. But like I say, I'm not a game developer, so I don't know for sure what's happening in these cases.
Thank you.
Sure.
It was... You can find your button.
So you talk about games as a vehicle for preparation for the trial, introducing the trial. You also talk about their use as outcome measures.
Yeah.
I guess the third big one, which wasn't so much touched on, is talk about clinical trials of games themselves and interventions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was the question we had at the front here. There's certainly that is going on. Game developers like Achille Laboratories are looking at their game, for example, as a treatment for patients with ADHD to help them with certain aspects of managing their ability to cope with distractions, etc. So it's not just a way of measuring; it's also a way of training. But that would have to undergo some sort of clinical testing, but not the same as a drug trial.
It seems that you see that that's a big model of clinical trials. Making mostly drugs and other kinds of biomedical interventions, and people are trying to sort of lift that and place it onto games. Some of it will fit, some of it will not fit. What is your sense?
Yeah, so there's new regulations now. The FDA have published some regulations on medical devices, and I think a game fits much closer into the category of a medical device than it does in terms of pharmacological treatment. So I think those guidances, of which I don't get involved really because we do pharmacological studies, it's that sort of guidance that you would probably follow if you were producing a game to use as a clinical treatment.
Okay. Thank you. It's what's fast, but is there maybe one question?
No, I'm going to say that as my question.
Excellent. That is absolutely perfect. Okay. There is lunch in the ballroom, but thank you very much.